I was 42 when I first noticed something off about the way my father's prescription refills were being handled. Being a pharmacist, I'm trained to spot discrepancies in the flow of medications, the expiration dates, lot numbers, and intervals at which refills are requested. My father, Gerald, was 78, a retired contractor whose heart condition meant he relied on a very specific and rather expensive medication to maintain stable blood pressure and reduce arrhythmia. My mother passed away years before, and Dad eventually remarried a woman named Miriam, who became my stepmother. She was in her mid-50s, well-dressed and charming whenever we had family gatherings, always projecting warmth and concern for Dad's well-being. I'd never questioned her motives before, but lately, the logs I kept in my head for Dad's prescription fills simply weren't adding up. It began as a nagging feeling. I'd see that Dad's insurance had been billed for a fresh bottle of his medication, 60 tablets, far too soon. At first, I wondered if maybe he'd started taking a higher dose, or if there'd been some new complication. Dad would mention feeling off or fatigued, which could have meant anything at his age. The intervals between refills were so inconsistent that, as a rule, I asked him casually if he was adhering to Dr. Feldman's instructions. He looked perplexed and said he was doing whatever Miriam told him to. That was another small alarm for me. Dad was pretty good at managing his routine, especially after decades of running a successful contracting business. He wasn't the type to let someone else take over entirely. Yet here he was, letting Miriam handle his every pill, glass of water, and even scheduling his doctor's appointments. At the time, I told myself that, well, maybe it was just Dad's way of leaning on his new wife. But the puzzle pieces in the back of my mind refused to settle into place. I decided to pay closer attention to Dad's medication supply. Usually, I could see exactly how many pills remained whenever I visited. But on one particular Saturday, I went to check, and the bottle was almost empty. According to my records at the pharmacy, it should have been full. I'd seen the insurance claim processed just 2 days earlier. Dad was dozing in his recliner, so I couldn't ask him without making a scene. I strolled into the kitchen under the pretense of making some tea, found Miriam fiddling with her phone, and casually mentioned, "Dad's meds came in, right? Anything new from Dr. Feldman?" She gave me a bright smile, too bright, and insisted everything was exactly as it should be. I nodded, not wanting to make waves, but I was far from convinced. That night, I hardly slept. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. My mind went through every scenario. Maybe Dad was throwing the pills away by accident or taking extra because he forgot. Maybe the pharmacy made an error, though that was highly unlikely, given I oversaw the order myself. Then a more sinister possibility crept in. Someone was deliberately messing with his medication supply. But why? Who would profit from that? Selling prescription drugs under the table was a known racket, though I had never imagined it could happen in my own family's circle. Yet, as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I found it disturbingly hard to dismiss. I decided I had to proceed carefully. Confronting Miriam head-on without proof could blow up in my face, so I did the same thing I would do if I suspected a colleague of swapping high-cost meds at the pharmacy for cheap generics. I set up a discreet tracking system. Over the course of a week, I quietly installed tiny cameras in Dad's kitchen, medicine cabinet, and living room, spots where he was most likely to receive his pills. I used devices so small that even a sharp-eyed person would miss them. It felt invasive, sneaky, and I hated the idea of spying in my father's home. But protecting him was more important than my discomfort. Dad had always been there for me, supporting me through pharmacy school, believing in me when I wanted to start my own small consulting service on the side. And if someone was taking advantage of him, I would do whatever it took to stop them. A part of me secretly hoped the footage would reveal nothing sinister, that I would see Dad messing up his schedule, or perhaps Miriam giving him the correct pills at the right times. But the story that emerged from the recordings was far darker. I would come home after work, settle into my home office, once my 2 teenage sons were in bed, and carefully review the day's footage. At first, I just saw Miriam going to the cabinet, taking out the bottle of Dad's expensive heart medication, and then returning a few minutes later with a different pill bottle that looked suspiciously generic, with no brand label I recognized. Sometimes she'd fuss around the kitchen before handing a pill and a glass of water to Dad. He took it without question, trusting that his wife had his best interests at heart. I wasn't sure if Miriam was simply being cheap, maybe substituting a lower-cost medication. But as I continued watching, the audio I picked up, thanks to a small microphone near the cupboard, revealed conversations I never expected to hear. Miriam was on the phone, talking in hushed tones about the real stuff, being ready to ship. She'd name a price, sometimes hundreds of dollars per bottle, confirm a quantity, then say she'd arrange delivery in the afternoon. It was a classic sign of black market dealing, or at least a form of prescription fraud that involved flipping expensive medications for profit. The cheaper substitute she handed Dad was not the same formulation. From the label glimpses, it appeared to be a far less effective drug, likely to be detrimental to his heart condition in the long run. My stomach churned. Not only was she profiting illegally, but Dad was being put in medical danger. Still, I needed more than just footage of her switching bottles. The cynic in me knew she could argue it was some weird misunderstanding, so I called Dad's cardiologist, Dr. Feldman, a man I'd worked with professionally on various occasions. When I explained the situation, his shock was palpable. "If your father's not getting the actual medication," he said, "that could be severely compromising his heart health. We need to ensure he's safe. Can I adjust his therapy discreetly for the time being?" That was my next challenge. How to keep Dad from harm while not tipping off Miriam that I was onto her. Dr. Feldman suggested we switch Dad to a formulation of the drug that looked identical, but had a slightly different dosing schedule. He agreed to keep the details off the official records, using a private arrangement since I was a pharmacist and had the ability to manage Dad's medication. Under normal circumstances, I'd never accept going outside standard protocols, but Dad's life might depend on us staying one step ahead of Miriam. Implementing this took a delicate hand. I had to show up at Dad's house with the new medication, explaining that Dr. Feldman had recommended an additional supplement to help with some side effects. That way, we could ensure Dad was still getting the right chemical compound daily, without using the standard supply that Miriam could tamper with. Dad was a little confused by the shift, but he trusted me as his daughter and as a professional. "If you say this new plan helps my heart, I believe you," he told me. I fought to keep my smile steady, hating that he had to rely on covert measures in his own home. I continued collecting evidence. The camera near the front door caught Miriam receiving packages, presumably for her little side business. Another in the kitchen recorded her slipping the real medication bottles into a padded envelope, then carefully addressing them in neat handwriting. I even captured her marking on a calendar specific days for ship-outs, which aligned perfectly with the times my pharmacy's records showed Dad's medication was due for a refill. It was all meticulously planned on her part, except for one thing. She never anticipated that I, Dad's daughter, and a certified pharmacist, would notice the pattern. She must have thought my father was an easy mark. After all, he was older, had some heart trouble, and maybe she figured I was too busy with my own job to dig too deeply. She was wrong. One of the hardest parts was maintaining a facade when I visited. Miriam didn't suspect that I knew anything, so she'd continue playing the doting wife, offering me cookies or coffee, asking how work was going. I had to smile politely, chat about benign subjects, and carry on as if nothing was unusual. It gnawed at me to remain so composed in the presence of someone who was effectively poisoning my father by withholding the medication he needed. But I took solace in the fact that with every passing day, I was building a case so airtight that no lawyer could wiggle her out of it. In the meantime, Dad started noticing that he felt better. The surreptitious addition of the correct medication was making a real difference. At first, he assumed it was just because Miriam wasn't around as much. She had started leaving the house at odd times, presumably to handle her secret deliveries, and Dad said the atmosphere felt less tense. I wondered if he saw glimpses of her duplicity, but didn't want to confront it. Sometimes older individuals cling to the illusion that everything in their lives is stable and safe, especially when they've already lost one spouse, as Dad had lost my mother. I also suspected that Dad genuinely cared for Miriam, had believed her to be a faithful partner. Perhaps he was in denial or simply too tired to dig deeper. Miriam, on the other hand, seemed eager to move forward with some bigger plan. One afternoon, I arrived unannounced and found her flipping through glossy brochures for nursing homes. She quickly shut the folder when I walked in, plastering a smile on her face. "Oh, hi there. Didn't expect you," she said. I felt a flash of anger that she would even consider it, but I kept calm, feigning ignorance. "Just saw your car and thought I'd drop by," I replied, praying my voice stayed steady. After she left the room, I picked up the brochure she'd been looking at. It was indeed for a long-term care facility, one known for being extremely expensive, the sort of place where people go when they're unable to manage their own finances or health decisions. My father was stable, especially with the covert medication regimen we'd set up. Why would she be researching this so soon? I didn't have to stretch my mind too far to guess. If she got Dad declared mentally or physically incompetent, she could push for liquidating his assets to afford the place, while she pocketed whatever portion didn't go to the facility. I could see the plan forming in her head, a quick route to wealth without the risk of Dad's health holding on for too long. I left Dad's house that day, trembling with anger, but also more resolved than ever. I gave Dr. Feldman a quick update, thanked him for his help, and told him I was nearly ready to pull the trigger on revealing everything. He cautioned me to make sure Dad's safety was guaranteed first, since any confrontation might escalate tension at home. I promised I would. Over the next 2 weeks, I filmed enough material to fill a case file thicker than most legal textbooks. Miriam's voice was crystal clear in many recordings. She detailed her black market deals, complained about Dad's stubborn longevity, and even told a phone contact that once she put him in a facility, she'd have more freedom to expand the business. Listening to her was like peering into a stranger's life. This was the same woman who once baked me a birthday cake and talked about traveling with Dad for his next milestone birthday. The betrayal was unfathomable. I started to wonder if I should bring the police in immediately, but I also recognized the power of timing. From past experiences in the pharmacy world, I knew that well-organized evidence presented in a single bombshell moment can have a far stronger impact than trickling it out piece by piece. I wanted to ensure that my father was never again in the same house with her once it went down. But Dad resisted leaving his own home. He was old-fashioned, stubborn, and proud of the life he'd built there. So I orchestrated a plan. I told Dad that my kids, his grandkids, wanted to visit him for a special Sunday dinner. I would handle the groceries, the cooking, everything, so he wouldn't have to lift a finger. I knew Miriam wouldn't pass up an opportunity to play the gracious hostess, especially if it meant she could keep up appearances as the perfect wife. The stage was set for the final confrontation. That Sunday arrived with a bright sky and a crisp breeze. I showed up mid-afternoon, hauling grocery bags and greeting Dad with a hug. I saw an instant flicker of relief in his eyes, as if he was glad I was there to take some weight off his shoulders, though he didn't say it aloud. Miriam fluttered around in a nice sundress, opening wine, setting the table, and trying to chat with me about mundane topics like summer travel plans. I forced a smile, participating in small talk so she wouldn't suspect a thing. But beneath the facade, I felt my heart pounding. My binder of evidence was in my car, along with digital backups on a USB drive. I'd also arranged for a friend of mine, an off-duty police officer, to be waiting nearby once I gave the signal. Around 6 o'clock, the meal was ready. My 2 teenage sons arrived, happy to see their grandfather, though they sensed the tension and kept exchanging quick glances with me. We all sat at the dining table, with Miriam pouring wine liberally, eager to toast family. Dad patted my hand, saying how nice it was to have everyone together. My stomach churned. Was I about to ruin his illusions of harmony by exposing Miriam in front of him? Was he prepared for that heartbreak? Then I reminded myself it was the only way to protect him. Halfway through dinner, Miriam started talking about Dad's declining health and how it might be time to consider a more specialized environment for him. She waxed on about how it was for his own good, how she had looked at some lovely facilities that could handle all his needs. My father frowned, glancing at me, and said he felt just fine. But Miriam persisted, hinting that she might have to liquidate certain assets to manage the fees. That was the moment I set down my fork, slid back my chair, and calmly said, "Actually, Dad, before we talk about any of that, I have something to show everyone." I stepped away from the table and returned with the thick binder of documents, which I placed next to Dad's plate. Miriam gave me a puzzled, wary look. I flipped it open to the first set of photographs, screenshots from the videos of her swapping bottles. I explained, in a measured tone, that these images showed Miriam taking Dad's legitimate medication, packaging it up, and handing him a worthless substitute. I then showed snapshots of her phone call transcripts, referencing the amounts she sold it for. My voice never rose above a calm, professional register, even though I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. "Dad's been getting an alternative drug," I said, "and it's hurting him. Meanwhile, you've been pocketing the profit." Miriam's face drained of color. She clutched the stem of her wineglass, nearly knocking it over. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, eyes darting to my father. "She's lying, Gerald. She's making things up because she's jealous of us. Why would I ever do that?" But her voice trembled, betraying her panic. I continued flipping pages, dosage records that didn't match the official prescription, logs of shipments, mislabeled envelopes. Then I pulled out the final piece. The notes from Dr. Feldman confirming the effect this medication switch could have on Dad's heart. "We had to secretly supplement his medication," I said, "so he wouldn't get worse. And here's proof that it worked, because his vitals improved once we gave him the genuine pills again." Dad's eyes shimmered with confusion and hurt. He looked at Miriam, struggling to form words. "Tell me this isn't true," he whispered, voice catching in his throat. She couldn't meet his gaze. Then she turned to me, her face contorted in fury, and spat out, "You! How dare you spy on me? You had no right to invade my privacy." I resisted the urge to lash back and simply replied, "I had every right to protect my father, and your privacy ends where your crimes begin." She stood up so fast that her wine sloshed, dripping onto the white tablecloth. "I'm leaving," she shrilled. But at that moment, my friend from the police department stepped inside, accompanied by an on-duty officer I'd arranged to have waiting on the porch. Miriam froze, wineglass still in hand. The officer calmly explained that they had evidence of her involvement in illegal drug distribution and elder abuse. She tried to protest, but her words fell into stammers as the officer read her rights. Dad watched in silent shock as they handcuffed her right there in the dining room. She glared at me with a hatred I've rarely seen. Then she was gone, escorted out the front door, still holding that wineglass in one hand until one of the officers pried it away. The house went eerily quiet, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. My sons sat there, wide-eyed, having witnessed something they'd probably never forget. Dad's shoulders sagged, and I hurried to his side, kneeling by his chair and taking his hand. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I know this was a terrible way to find out, but we had to stop her." He nodded slowly, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. How long has she been doing this?" he managed. I told him what I knew. A few months, maybe more. Enough time to endanger his health significantly. He said nothing, just stared at the tablecloth where the wine had spilled. Then he let out a shaky breath, as if finally releasing the tension that had built up inside him for weeks or even months. I helped him to his recliner afterward, while my kids cleared the table in a subdued hush. The off-duty officer friend of mine offered to stay a while, making sure everything was all right. But I just shook my head. Dad needed a sense of privacy and calm to process what had happened. Once we were alone, I explained all the details: how I discovered the refill schedules were off, the videos, the phone calls, Dr. Feldman's assistance. Dad absorbed it in silence. At one point, he murmured that he felt like such a fool. I hastened to reassure him that none of this was his fault. "She was manipulating you," I said. "She knew exactly how to prey on your trust. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Still, I could see the heartbreak in his expression. He had truly loved Miriam, believing she cared about his life, not just his bank account. In the following days, the story spread among our wider family. Some members refused to believe Miriam could do something so callous, while others claimed they'd always been suspicious of her. I, for one, avoided the gossip as much as possible. My priority was ensuring Dad's health stabilized and that the legal side of things was handled properly. Thankfully, the case was cut and dry for the authorities. They had stacks of evidence from my recordings and from the packages of stolen medication they found in Miriam's possession. She faced charges of prescription fraud, elder abuse, and likely a few other financial crimes, depending on how deeply the detectives dug into her dealings. As for Dad, I convinced him to come stay with me for a while. He protested, clinging to his independence, but after what had happened, he recognized the necessity. My youngest son gave up his bedroom, bunking with his older brother temporarily, and Dad moved in with a suitcase and some cherished photographs of my late mother. Settling him into my home was initially awkward. Dad was used to calling the shots, and I had my own household routines. But we found a rhythm. I set out a pill organizer for him on the kitchen counter. This time, with genuine medication, I sourced directly from the pharmacy, double-checking everything. I walked him through each time of day he needed to take a pill, and we reconnected in a way I hadn't anticipated. My father and I had always been close, but the gravity of this crisis, and the fact that we'd overcome it, brought a new depth to our bond. He even joked that maybe it was a good thing I was so obsessed with details at work. "Who else could catch a crook like that?" he teased, giving me a weary smile. I laughed for the first time in days, hugging him and telling him I was just relieved he was safe. Weeks passed, and as the legal machinery turned, I learned more about Miriam's operation. She had, indeed, been funneling Dad's medication into a small underground network that sold high-cost prescription drugs at inflated prices to patients without insurance or to unscrupulous middlemen. Investigators found multiple shipping receipts going out of state, along with text messages that spelled out the scale of her scheme. She had probably made thousands of dollars in profit, mostly stashed away in an account Dad knew nothing about. My father was simultaneously furious and devastated. He vacillated between wanting to confront her in court and wanting to let the whole thing go. But the prosecutors encouraged him to stand firm for the sake of justice. Ultimately, they had enough evidence without requiring Dad to testify in great detail, which was a relief for him. The last thing he wanted was to be publicly humiliated any further. Bit by bit, he regained his sense of autonomy. Dr. Feldman told me that physically, Dad was bouncing back nicely, largely thanks to the consistent dosing of his real medication. Mentally and emotionally, he carried a new wariness, which was understandable. He said he felt like he'd gone from a happily married man to a betrayed widower all over again. One afternoon, while we were having tea in my living room, he confided that he couldn't stop replaying events in his head, questioning how he missed the signs. I told him that manipulative people are skilled at hiding their intentions. "It wasn't your job to watch for swindlers," I said gently. "You deserved an honest partner, and she took advantage of that." A month after Miriam's arrest, my father decided he wanted to return to his own house. He insisted he was strong enough now, and I had to respect his independence. He asked if I would help him secure it, though, because he didn't want to feel vulnerable again. I replaced some locks, installed new cameras, the legal kind with notices posted, and hired a part-time caregiver from an agency I personally vetted thoroughly. I also moved many of his valuables into a safe deposit box so there'd be less to worry about at home. Dad was still well off financially because Miriam hadn't had time to bleed his accounts dry. The biggest heartbreak was her betrayal, not the monetary losses. Slowly, life found a new normal. I returned to my busy schedule at the pharmacy, but I popped over to Dad's house a few times a week just to check in. He was lonely, but it was a different kind of loneliness, tempered by relief that he no longer lived under deceit. I helped him consult a lawyer who guided him through the process of annulling his marriage to Miriam, citing fraud and criminal activity. The judge naturally had no objections. As for Miriam, she stayed in jail, her bail set high. My father declined to pay for her defense, of course, and she apparently had burned bridges with anyone else who might have lent her money. She ended up accepting a plea bargain that would see her serve time, the exact length depending on restitution and cooperation with the authorities. I didn't follow the details too closely, though. That was her fate to deal with. When the day of her sentencing finally arrived, Dad asked if I would accompany him to the courthouse. He wanted closure, he said. I agreed, though a part of me dreaded seeing her again. She walked into the courtroom in a drab jumpsuit, a shadow of the polished, confident woman who had hosted Sunday dinners at Dad's home. She shot me a glare when she noticed me, then turned away, head bowed. The hearing was brief. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence and the serious nature of prescription fraud. Miriam's lawyer argued for leniency, claiming she had no prior convictions, that she was drawn into this because of financial pressures. None of it rang true to me. The judge handed down a multi-year sentence, including restitution. Miriam stared into space, barely reacting. I wondered if she felt regret or if she only resented being caught. The bailiffs led her away, and Dad exhaled a shaky breath. I squeezed his arm, guiding him out of the courtroom. Outside, in the bright daylight, he seemed unburdened, as if a great weight had been lifted. We drove back to his house, where my teenage sons were waiting to show Grandpa some new pictures they'd taken from a family holiday. Dad smiled at them, gave them each a hearty hug, and then turned to me with an expression of deep gratitude. We didn't need words at that moment. We'd been through a trial by fire. Miriam's presence was a memory now, and the future was ours to shape without her shadow. A year passed. Dad remained in his home, though he let me set up automated medication deliveries, so there was no repeat of the fiasco with someone intercepting them. The part-time caregiver I'd hired turned out to be a genuinely kind person who respected boundaries. She made sure Dad ate well, did some light exercise, and, most importantly, took the correct dose of his heart medication daily. Dad grew stronger. Freed from the stress of living under deception, his overall health improved. Dr. Feldman said Dad's heart sounded better than it had in years. My father grinned when he heard that, thanking me and the good doctor for intervening at such a critical juncture. Professionally, I went on to open a small specialty pharmacy that handled complex medication regimens for seniors, in addition to keeping some hours at my old workplace. The experience with Miriam, harrowing as it was, awakened a passion in me for protecting vulnerable elderly patients from scams or from ignorance about their prescriptions. I consulted with local charities and even gave talks about the warning signs of prescription fraud. My father attended one of these talks, sitting in the back row with a quiet pride on his face. I made sure not to single him out, knowing it could embarrass him, but after the session, he hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you. Thank you for turning that terrible experience into something that helps others." Sometimes memories of that Sunday dinner resurface, Miriam standing in the dining room, her wine glass shaking in her hand, the astonishment on her face when she realized her scheme had been laid bare. I don't take pleasure in her downfall. In truth, I feel pity for someone so consumed by greed that she'd risk a man's life just to make a profit. But I do feel relief that she can't harm Dad, or anyone else, again for the foreseeable future. And if she ever does get out and tries to hustle someone else, I can only hope they have the resources or awareness to catch her. Looking back, I see that the best revenge against someone like Miriam wasn't even about vengeance. It was about restoring my father's health, safeguarding his finances, and giving him peace of mind in his golden years. Once he felt safe, once we'd exposed the truth and ensured that not a penny more could be siphoned away, that was our victory. No need for screaming matches or dramatic threats, just quiet, meticulous evidence gathering, the backing of a reputable cardiologist, and the unwavering conviction that I wouldn't let my dad be victimized. The satisfaction lies in seeing him smile freely again, cooking small meals, pottering in his garden, and even flirting with the idea of adopting a rescue dog. He never resumed contact with Miriam, nor did he respond to the letters she sent from jail. His lawyer advised against it, fearing emotional manipulation. Dad told me he had no desire to rehash a relationship founded on deception. He'd had a real, loving marriage once, my mother, and that memory was enough for him. And I respected his decision, understanding that some wounds never truly heal, but can at least be left to scar over. 2 years have passed since that Sunday dinner. Dad is now 80, and I still check in on him regularly. My boys, now practically grown, drop by to help with yard work or join him for a baseball game on TV. My father's eyes light up whenever they arrive, and he never fails to express gratitude for everything we've been through together. His heart condition remains manageable with the correct medication, which is a constant reminder of what could have gone horribly wrong if Miriam had succeeded in her full plan. I have a small photo on my desk, Dad standing with me on the day I opened my specialty pharmacy, both of us wearing proud smiles. It's a testament to our bond, to the triumph of calm persistence over treachery. When people ask me about the strangest case of fraud I've ever encountered, I sometimes consider telling them about Miriam, but usually I just say, "You'd be surprised what some people will do for money." I don't go into the details, because they're too personal. What matters is that justice was served, and that Dad's life is no longer in danger. He's able to live with dignity, enjoy his retirement, and keep making memories with his grandchildren. That, to me, is the ultimate sign that we came out on top. Whenever the memory of Miriam's betrayal resurfaces, accompanied by that pang of hurt on Dad's behalf, I remind myself, we overcame it. Step by step, quietly and methodically, we dismantled her scheme. My father's life, his savings, and his spirit remain intact, a living testament to resilience. I can't fix the fact that he experienced a terrible betrayal in his final chapter of life, but I can ensure the rest of his days are spent in peace. And in the end, that's what matters. We move forward, not looking back, confident in the knowledge that once again, the best revenge is simply preserving what's good and never letting the darkness win.